Sorry? But you are muted.
We are now live. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see why it doesn't show up as the session started on the web page, and I think it works now.
And it'll start to autoplay, and we'll have to quickly mute our YouTube windows in the other
So I
browser.
already closed it.
Oh, okay.
Fine. So now this thing, opening up the pad. I've already put some stuff for a semblance of an agenda on the public pad, which I'll paste the URL in IRC, even though it's probably in the topic. Oh, no, it's not. Good. So the URL I've just pasted is a link to the agenda, some links about EFI, and some place to take the notes. Steve, do you want to take the notes for this session?
Sure, I can take some notes.
Okay. So to summarize a bit, the story behind this is the EFI specification allows us to do a bunch of fun things in running applications. Has started by the BIOS and in various steps of the boot process. One of these cool things is that rather than having to have a user reboot to Windows or boot to a USB key that has Windows PE, DOS, or some other operating system, using EFI Capsule, they can start this EFI app, which will apply updates to their BIOS or software or hardware components directly from the EFI app, so without the use of a third-party operating system. And this is something that we definitely want because, of course, it makes it that much more easy for users to apply updates and have secure systems or properly working systems. The capsule update itself is an extension of the EFI of the generic UEFI specification. I put the link to the gory details in the pad, but I don't think we really should stop and spend so much time on that as part of the session. However, we did start to do some work in getting the support for EFI capsule in the Wiley cycle, and we already have some small other bits that were added for Xennial, and now we need to start thinking about what we'll do what are our targets for 1604 and supporting EFI for the desktop. So if I move on to the blueprints, our main blueprint for this session and for the release is going to be this one that I'm pasting. So core 1511 EFI capsule and callback, and it already has as a prerequisite another blueprint that I've created early on in the Wiley cycle, which was Foundations W UEFI capsule update, which highlights some of the lower level steps that we needed to do, has very basic prerequisites to be able to do EFI capsule updates. One of those was to have a kernel that would support these features, so that from there we could use the userland applications to be able to tell the BIOS what we needed to do once one reboots to the EFI FW update binary. So looking at what TJ says on IRC. Oh, the capsule path Um, it it arguably could be pretty much anything, but it needs to be on the ESP partition, so the specific partition that we use for the EFI binaries, and that is why we keep things currently in boot EFI, EFI Ubuntu, and then FW once an image has been copied. But I now realize that you're likely talking about the images as shipped by vendors, and that's a whole matter entirely. What happens, I think what the general user story is for firmware updates as provided by vendors would be that we aren't necessarily looking at shipping them as Debian packages right now, but rather there are efforts upstream to be able to ship those using an AppStream service, which is currently hosted by Red Hat, I think. I need to look up the URL. But anyway, there's an AppStream service, which is more or less how we do to pick up other software. You're muted.
So opt/vendor is the path that AppStream is downloading them to? Is that what that means? Okay.
Actually, AppStream is not the FW update binary on userland doesn't actually download that to opt/vendor at all. I think it directly downloads it to a temporary directory and then copies it directly to the EFI vendor FW path.
Okay, so if we do currently have an opt/vendor path encoded in FW update as a path that looks in, it may make sense for it to support user share UEFI as a path, even if our primary use is not to have these packages provided.
Yeah, I can definitely see a value in keeping a backup, if you will, of those files, especially in some place other than ESP.
Right. Well, I'm not proposing a backup per se, and I'm suggesting that this would be something that the service downloads and then posts. It's something that would be, if somebody did want to ship them in a package, this is how they would do it.
Oh, yeah. So indeed, the URL is now on IRC, Secure LVS, RH Cloud. I believe it currently doesn't contain anything. Or maybe it does now.
Okay. So we have started the work this cycle, enabling FW update, and making this proof of concept work on top of Snappy, and that's been our focus for validation. We do also, this cycle we're looking at EFI capsule support for non-Snappy Ubuntu systems as well. So Mathieu, are there any open questions about how that's going to work?
It depends at the level of integration that we're aiming for, because in and of itself, what we have is FW update and FW up DMGR, so two userland tools that allow us to do things at the command line level. I did start to put down some ideas on how we could integrate this for the desktop, but it's definitely not something that is fully fleshed out. My idea was that, but it was based on the integration of shipping updates via deb packages, which is not necessarily how we'll do things. But in the end, my idea was that it could be integrated into what we currently have for device drivers, and make use of mod aliases to be able to identify deb packages that ship specific firmware updates. In the light of using AppStream, then it clearly doesn't work the same way. I understood that there was a GUI application probably on Red Hat to be able to get the packages from AppStream and display that using a GUI, but I'm not sure.
So the desktop team was talking about actually, with 1604, using GNOME software. Does that mean we can just, and I believe that's going to work with, Red Hat's making that work on Fedora anyway with this. Would that basically cover that?
Probably. I don't know exactly what GNOME software is. I haven't,
GNOME
to be honest,
software.
I haven't spent so much time on desktop software in a long while.
So GNOME software is the desktop component that comprises, as I understand it, both the GUI for managing updates as well as the dbus service that installs them. I don't know which pieces of that the desktop team is taking this cycle. It's possible we're only talking about the GUI and not the back end. So I think there's some question there about. It's an open question. We'll need to talk with the desktop team to understand what they are doing there. Yeah, because GNOME software, using GNOME software doesn't imply having all of the same data sources. Or, there's questions about which data sources are wired up to GNOME software, and there's also questions about policies for which sources are being pulled automatically or so forth. The priority level is of this. I think it's, regardless of whether or not we commit to it for 1604, it's good to have the plan for how we're going to do it and what we agree is the right design.
Yeah. So, I mean, for the continuation of this, I suppose people should subscribe to the blueprint and watch how we progress on it and whether we add details. So, to answer the question about supporting other devices for booting, for applying updates, essentially you could already PXC boot to an image to apply your updates, but all of these depend on specific bits being flipped in the BIOS to enable each of the updates that you want to apply. So you still need to do something before you reboot, but then you could certainly do that by booting on PXC or booting on mass storage, by either loading the FW update EFI binary directly or chaining it through another bootloader.
Right. For context, the discussion on IRC was about enterprises wanting firmware updates to not be in the user's hand. So in a sense, this is all being done automatically and is managed remotely. It's currently set up to pull those updates in by way of user space to the system as driven by the AppStream service. There is no manual user interaction with these capsule updates. Booting into UEFI, all they're doing is executing a reboot and having the capsule update applied non-interactively. So that may meet the enterprise requirements. If there are other requirements, then certainly we should explore those. And Peter comments that it doesn't quite work with Pixie booting just because you need a local file system to load it.
Yeah, the work is in progress to support that. I did see some initial work, I think. All right.
So something that it sounds like Upstream will be working to support in the future. But again, even an enterprise can manage these, and the reboot still has to be triggered from user space anyway for the firmware update, and that part the existing user space software already handles.
Well, I mean, arguably, you could a vendor could probably ship a CD which boots into Ubuntu and only runs FW update the CLI binary to apply the update, and then reboots, and it could possibly reboot in the right way to apply the updates. But it's kind of out of the scope of what we're looking at right now. And perhaps to add one detail to the story right now for doing the updates is that we have things in place so that you can boot to FW update by shinning it through shim as opposed to booting directly FW update. Not that it changes much the behavior, it's just that it changes in a way that people might expect to install the boot entries in EFI to be able to start into FW updates.
Okay.
Yep. I think we pretty much covered the very small agenda that we had. So I'd be quite happy to end the session fairly early, but still there are some questions from TJ. But I think it will work better if we try to address them directly on IRC rather than reading the IRC questions, responding on the Hangouts.
That's right. I think we can go ahead and end and follow up on IRC. Take those discussions offline. Well, thanks everybody.
Yep. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Brian. And
Thank you.
Thanks everybody who joined on IRC. And we'll just keep on over there.
Cool.